I speak in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. That's how you know all the Catholics in the crowd, right? Just do that. All the Catholics, just right away. It's a Newfoundland joke, and I won't talk more about that one. So I'm going to talk to you today about Psalm 23, and specifically about walking through the valley of the shadow of death, or the darkest path. And it just, has it ever seemed a little bizarre or interesting to you how the psalm goes, oh, it's so nice, I'm hanging out by the lake, and it's calm, and it's sunny, and there's grass, and I'm just so relaxed, everything is good. The first part of the psalm, right? And then it goes, and now I'm sitting in front of my enemies who probably would like to kill me, and I'm good. Hey, I feel comforted, you're with me, your rod and your staff are there. And is that ever, I don't know if it's ever struck you, but for many people it's not very comforting at all. A friend of mine who's a therapist, and I work as a therapist now, I'll say a little bit more about that shortly. She said to me, she once offered the psalm to a Christian she was working with who had a diagnosis of schizophrenia. And she was very, very distressed, and she found the psalm very comforting, the first part. But as the more and more time she read it, the sit in front of your enemy part just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it just crowded out the whole psalm for her. She just said, I hate this psalm because what kind of God makes me sit in front of my enemies who are the ones who are hurting me or have hurt me? And in her case, there were lots of people in her life who had hurt her. So, the idea that God would want her to go and sit with those people was just absolutely repulsive. And so, for some people, it's not comforting, but I want to offer you a suggestion as to a way in which you can understand it, which is maybe quite comforting. And we'll see if the way I offer it to you is that. Funny story about how I ended up here. I was coming here to a conference, actually, an international therapist conference, which is here in Montreal. Very exciting. It's a part of a therapy model that I work in, which is values-based. It's spiritually consistent. And there's like an international community of psychologists who practice this particular model. And it works well for me as a chaplain in a mental institute. And I asked to be funded to come here, and the military paid for it. You might think, well, that's kind of weird, the military paying like a chaplain to go to an international psychologist conference. Why would they do that? Well, there's some very interesting things that are going on in the Canadian Armed Forces right now, which you may not know about, because if you're not inside the bubble, how would you? And we just launched an update to our Canadian Armed Forces doctrine for the next 20 years, and it gets done every 20 years or so. And in it, they have something called a total wellness strategy. And in the total wellness strategy, it lays out core competencies and core functionalities required for what the most evidence-based science that we have says is required in order for our soldiers to be able to do the job of being soldiers and to go into harm's way and to do and to see what they have to do and to see, and to come back home and to be able to reintegrate into our community and get ready to go again. And that's no small task, right? For those of you who know much about what people in our military do and the kinds of mental illnesses that they suffer, no small task. Well, guess what they discovered is one of the core competencies that is determined to be essential to every soldier's ability to be resilient in the face of being a soldier? Spirituality. Not just, well, it's nice to have some chaplains around in case someone dies so they can say a prayer, but an actual core competency for how to function as an effective, efficient, resilient soldier who, if you break physically or mentally, spirituality is going to be something that's going to help you get better, and that actually building it into the front end of your training, right from the level of when you go into basic training, is an essential feature to building the most capable soldiers for the next 100 years. I mean, does this sound crazy? The military's doing this? Well, it may seem a little odd on the surface, but if I peel back the layers, you may discover that actually it makes a lot of sense, and that actually the really amazing thing is that contemporary science is actually coming to arrive at a place which is very similar to what we as people of faith have known for a few thousand years. And so I'm going to talk a lot about some science things for a little while, and I want to invite you to keep saying, hey, that's kind of like faith. Like, what, they think we don't know that? No, we know it. And I'm inviting you to say, wow, this is so amazing. All this science is pointing at religion. As it turns out, people like me who are religious people in the military, we're getting looked to say, hey, you guys are onto something. And we're like, yeah, we knew that already. And so it's really exciting, and I think it might be very interesting when we come back to Psalm 23 and asking the question, how can we be comforted in the presence of our enemies? How is that possible? What's that about? So the essence of the whole model of spirituality within the military that's emerging is really, as far as I can say, it's in the development phase right now. There's a lot of people talking to a lot of people, and it's really being formulated. But you can organize the essence of what spirituality is emerging as within the context of the military as meaning, purpose, and connection. So I tried to get an acronym, MAPS, but the connection, so connection, but meaning, purpose, and connection. And so very simply, a way of understanding that, meaning would be a meaningful life. If you have a meaningful day, it means you woke up, you went through the day, good and bad happened, but you know what? You felt like, you know what? That was a day worth living, right? You had a meaningful day. If you have a meaningful life, at the end of your life, you look back and you say, you know what? That was an experience that was worth living. There's almost no regrets in a way. It comes, it goes, and it's just life, and you're good with it. And it's meaningful. And you do it, and whatever the challenges are, you work with them because it's just meaningful. Now the question then, that's meaning. Now purpose. What makes life meaningful? Well, what a whole lot of science is now discovering is that if people don't have a clear understanding of why they're doing something, they don't tend to be as keen on doing it. They don't tend to be as able to find meaning in it. So if you just sort of randomly go through life and you're just thrown from one crisis to another crisis to another crisis, and next thing you know, life's over, you're like, oh, what was that all about? Woof, it was a whirlwind, it just flashed by. But what they're finding is if people are able to have a clear sense of what their core, wait for it, this is psychology telling this now, their core values, yes, that big religious word, if people are aware of what their core values are, then they're able to more clearly understand whether or not something they're doing is meaningful or not. And as it turns out, if they're coming out of their core values, whatever that is, as personally defined, if they're coming out of it, what the research is showing is if there's obstacle, if there's challenge, if there's crisis, but it's being faced in the service to their core values, people tend to be okay with facing those obstacles. People tend to be okay with having setbacks. Because if I try to do something and it's consistent with who I am and what I want to be, and it doesn't work out, then I'm not a failure. The activity to live out my value didn't go well. So then, okay, well then I guess I just need to figure out another strategy to try and live consistent with my core values. Now again, if this sounds religious, it's because religious people like us, this is not complicated stuff. This is what it is to be a person of faith, right? We have the summary of the law, which lays it all down. Love God and love each other, and built within love is respect of other people on their own journey, needing to find their own path, and that we work with each other to empower each other to live that out. And sometimes some of us are doing better than others, and sometimes some of us are not doing as well as others, and we just support each other, and we walk this journey of faith together, trying to learn to more fully love and care for each other in a way where we demand respect, and try and love and be cared for by God as a way of empowering us to do that, right? Nothing new to us as religious people, right? But modern psychology, the supposed enemy of religion, is discovering this for themselves right now and are turning towards religious people like me saying, y'all got something going on there. And we're like, yeah, like I think so. Yeah, I think there's definitely something we could talk about here. So then, connection, meaning living out a life where you're feeling like life's worth living. Purpose, a sense in which you have core values which you're living by, whereby if you're living by them, no matter what life throws at you, it's still meaningful because you're living in a consistent manner with your purpose and the reason why you're living. And then connection in that, as it turns out, all kinds of research now in the last 50 years has been done, which has shown this over and over again. As it turns out, when babies are born, anybody remember the Spock method? Dr. Spock for how to raise children? Let the baby cry until they grow up. There's no science that supports that today. It says, no, the baby cries because it needs to be comforted, because it's not a lizard. See, lizards are born, they can't make noise. The first thing they do is run, because if they don't run, mommy will eat them. Human babies are born and we have no ability to run. Actually, the only ability we have to do is scream. And you think, well, if a lizard did that, it would be eaten by mommy right away, because mommy would be like, sound, food, chomp. But us as humans, we're born and we're helpless. We're utterly helpless. And we holler as loud as we can in order for someone to feed us and to protect us. Now you might think, oh, well that hollering thing, I mean, that's pretty risky, right? Because think about the lizard. If the lizard could holler, it would die. But as it turns out, we have these brains whereby when we hear one of us cry, we feel pain. That's what it means to be a mammal, right? We have these frontal lobes and we have these mirror neurons. And when someone else has an emotion, we have the emotion. And then we respond to that emotion in us. And we go, oh, baby sad, make baby happy. And we hug the baby, right? Lizards? Squealy animal, eat. Very different creatures that we are than reptiles. Now, you might say, well, where's this all going in terms of psychology and in terms of the psalm? Well, it goes something like this. Human beings are now being understood by psychologists to be like that not only as babies, but as people who go through every single stage of our lives, right to the day we die. When I was here, it was an interesting call that came in to Lorne, and it was, yeah, they're calling for an Anglican over at the hospital. Robin, that will be a good opportunity for you to go and, have some pastoral experience with someone in the hospital who's dying. I said, okay, sounds good. Give me the name, give me the contact information, off I go. And I go over and I walk into a hospital, and there's a gentleman there who, as it turns out, Anglican meant he was raised Anglican. And he was dying from cancer. He had a rather large stomach. He had stomach cancer. He was still, his cognitive faculties were all still there, but he was being fed through a tube. And, well, you get the picture. And he was horrified of dying. And I talked to him about it and offered comforting words, as we saw, we see in our words. And he said, yeah, but I'm scared I'm going to be condemned for the wrongs that I've done. And I said, would you like to share with me about that? And he wasn't comfortable to do that. But within the period of time that I supported him as he was dying over a week, all his family showed up. And as it turns out, his son came from England, and his son had, as it turns out, a very difficult relationship with his father growing up. And he had fled, he did the geographical cure and went to England, and he had only been back for a very long time ago, to be there with his dying father. And he confessed to me his father's sins about the way his father had treated him as a young man. And basically his father was angry. And this was something that was projected at the children, and it hurt this young man immensely. And I said to him, well, your father's dying, and you're going to need to make, I hope sometime in your life you can make peace with that, and you could forgive him for that, and so you can be freed from it, right? And you could reconnect with him and have this moment with him before he dies. And he said, there's no effing, and he laid down a strip of swears, then I'm going to forgive that, SOB, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, no problem. I said, but just know if you can't do it in the body, maybe someday you'll be able to do it in the spirit, because you'll carry this hatred of him with you, and you'll always be disconnected from him in your heart. And maybe someday you'll be free to that. And he then said some nasty words to me and walked away. And so that was fine. But in the end, he came back and said goodbye to me, and off he went. And he did not make peace with his brother or his father before he left. So the point of that is we have within us this deep longing to be connected to other human beings. And when we feel anything like a disconnection from any other human being, we actually, at the level of our bodies, respond to it like it's a threat to us dying. So when a baby, and it makes sense from a biological point of view, right? When a baby hollers when it's hungry, if no one comes, it dies, right? And it's just that simple. And for a baby, that scream is, help me not die, right? So we're built that way. And it just seems strange, but as adults, we're that way too. When they've done studies with people, wiring them up to all kinds of electrodes and everything, and testing their brains, and whether their brains are in a state of relaxation or they're in a state of threat. So very simply, the way the body works and the nervous system works is we have two systems, right? There's the friend system and the foe system, right? In basic fight or flight stuff. So it goes like this. At every moment, at the nanosecond level, your brain will flip from enemy or friend, right? And of course, this makes a lot of sense. If you're a bunny rabbit out in nature and you're chomping on a little bit of lettuce or a carrot or whatever you're eating, and suddenly you hear a twig crack and it's a fox, you better be running in a nanosecond, because all the rabbits that didn't run in a nanosecond, they don't exist anymore. They all got eaten by foxes, right? So we're wired to respond. And if you think about human beings, 50,000 years ago, our ancestors wandered north in Africa. And they then spread to every corner of the planet and faced every kind of natural environment, predator, climate, and nothing stopped them from being able to adapt and have more babies, and those babies grow up to have more babies. Like, what an incredible task of doing that. And how we did it was two things. The minute anything happened around us that could be a threat, immediately we flashed up and went to, okay, this could be it. And then secondly, we looked to each other. And we did it together. So how does a little human this tall take down a dinosaur? Well, 50 of these little people, and there's this one guy, you imagine, I don't know how they did it, right? Maybe they drew sticks. Who's the guy who's the bait for the dinosaur today, right? Somebody's got to be the bait, right? So to see a dinosaur coming along, and one guy goes out and says, ah! And then 49 guys stand over here with spears, right? And then they take turns. I mean, you got to have a lot of trust. You got to really got to trust all the other hunters to be the guy that the dinosaur runs at. And there's the most likely chance that anyone dies, as it turns out, is the guy who's the bait. But everybody does it. Everybody takes their turn, right? This is exactly the way the military functions today, right? When we train soldiers to go into combat, we train them to assume that your life is in the hands of the people who are with you. That's what the military is, as it turns out. The military is just like those little pygmies who left from Africa and migrated to the entire planet. And it only works if we're so invested in each other that the minute we sense we're disconnected, we got to reconnect. That's life or death. So we're all wired that way. So what then might this all have to do with Psalm 23? Well, the question is, how does one walk the darkest path? Or in other translations, how does one sit at a table in the presence of one's enemies and not be afraid? Or to not be paralyzed by it, but to be able to be there and to be comforted. I mean, one of the Psalms says it's, in our faith in God, we're like babies weaned from the breast. Do you know what a baby is like when they're just there with their mom and they're just cuddled and they just feel safe and they feel happy and they just know the world is how it's meant to be? See, I think what this is talking about is how we have within us the ability to be like that babe in the arms of God. And that ultimately, when we're not in a state where we feel like this incredible connection at the deepest level of our very being, if we're not in that state of connection, then we're going to be scared. It's going to be a threat. It's just how we're built. So we think about, if we're not in God's loving arms, we're going to be scared of the world. St. Paul says, we all got to believe in something. If we don't, and whatever you worship is the thing that's going to feed you or not feed you. And so, to me, what makes sense to this passage is the sense in which we have the ability in each other, in our relationship with each other and with God, to feel so connected with each other that in the face of our enemies who could kill us, we feel safe. Now, some people might think that means, well, therefore, if you believe in Jesus, you won't suffer. If you go into battle, right? I personally, for example, don't pray for defeat over the enemy. It's just not something I pray for. I pray for other things with soldiers. I'm not sure. I mean, I want everyone that I work with to come home safe. But is there something more at work in what we pray for other than other people losing? See, I think the ultimate thing to pray for is God's presence. Because as far as I can tell from the Bible that I've been reading, Jesus didn't exactly grow old and live a long and prosperous life and die with all of his grandchildren around him, right? He kind of had it pretty tough there for a while till he died. Now, as whatever you want to say about the resurrection, when it comes to this life, there is no guarantee of an absence of suffering. There is no guarantee of an early death. But there is a guarantee that God's presence will always be there. And that presence is a kind of presence that's eternal. Well, so what I want to suggest to you is maybe, just maybe, the eternalness of God is in connection. It's in love. Maybe, just maybe, there's a way in which we can find a way to open ourselves to experiencing God's love here and now, whereby in the face of death we're not afraid. Maybe. I think that's definitely what the psalmist was feeling when he said, I don't think he was saying, I knew that nothing bad was going to happen to me, because you know what? I mean, the history of the Jewish people was not nothing bad happens to us. I mean, was this during the exile? It was just, what time of incredible suffering and death and misery for the Jewish people was this psalm written? We don't know, but what we do know is being faithful and true to God doesn't mean nothing goes wrong, right? Doesn't mean we're not going to suffer. Doesn't mean we're not going to die an early death. It could mean we're going to live to be very, very old and live excruciatingly painful deaths while everyone else around us dies and we are alone and old. I mean, it could mean a lot of things. There's no promise of whatever picture of life it is that everything goes well. But the promise that we can have a presence that will love us and that will care for us and that will ask us to be the same with each other, and that be a way of supporting each other, that we're promised. That we know for sure. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. That's what Scripture tells us. And it doesn't mean God as the one who rewards us whatever we want if we do the right things. It means God is this inner presence. So the military now has seen this. An example, one of the strongest predictors of PTSD after 1 year after returning from a theater of war is the strength of your social support network when you get home. One of the strongest predictors of whether or not people develop PTSD. Why? Because PTSD is when people get traumatized, where they get scared, where they get overwhelmed, where their life, they almost die, and that traumatizes them so intensely that the only way out of that seems to be come home and be loved and be reconnected and reestablish the value of your life, and that'll pass. Or you witness things, or you do things in service to your country which fundamentally violate your sense of human decency. Again, moral injury. You come home, and if you have a strong support network of human beings, especially if you have a church community where forgiveness is an essential part of it, and you find a way to reconnect with yourself and with whatever the greater sense of what life is can be, and then with your community. So I hope this is some level of good news for you, that as people of faith who think, well, what a terrible world, there's so much conflict, there's so many bad things happening, what could be possible good news? Well, I have to tell you, for me, what an incredible body of good news it is that our military has seen it to be clear that one of the essential things to train soldiers in from basic training onward is how to have a clear sense of what your own core values are, what your purpose in life is, and how important it is for you to be connected to your family at home, to your peers that you're going to go to war with, and to the people you come back to live with. That is critical, and that somehow that is a spiritual thing. It's not called religious because religious presupposes you're in some kind of institution. But the heart of it, I would hope every one of you could say, yeah, well, meaning, purpose, and connection, that totally makes sense within my religious tradition. And so if it does make sense for you, the good news in this is it makes sense to your military and the modern psychologists. It makes sense to them. And so I think there's going to be an interesting period of time that's going to come now in our country whereby there's going to be a very, very different perspective that you're going to see towards religion and towards church. And your military and your chaplaincy is at the front of that. And so hopefully then, when we think of Psalm 23, and we think of life, and we think of that there's challenges, and we think of that there are hardships, hopefully we can imagine that no matter what the enemy is, and it could be a person, it could be a situation, it could be a condition that we live with, it could be a reality of some sort. Hopefully, if there's anything you can take away from this, is that you're built by God spiritually. You're built in your very body to find a way through all of that, through as simple a thing as a hug from someone who you can trust, as a phone call with someone who you know cares about you, and as a turning with all your heart and all your mind to a God who, without question, loves you unconditionally. Hopefully, when times of trouble come, you might think of this psalm, and you might remember that God's comfort is always there. God guarantees not that we will be challenged in life, but that he'll always be there for us, he'll always love us, he'll always care for us, and that he puts people like you, fellow Christians, fellow family members there to help us, to comfort us, to strengthen us, and to guide us. And so may you have a peaceful day, and where there is not peace, may the comfort of God guide you to a place where you know in his arms all things are bearable, and that a joy beyond all measure awaits you beyond this life, and in many ways is offered to you to participate in while you live. And may the people around you who love you be that for you today.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.